Okay. Hello, everybody. Good evening. It is absolutely fantastic to see so many of you here today. Oh, I've got a strange echo coming. Has that been turned off? Wonderful. I could hear myself coming out of my left ear, which was going to be unbearable. It is brilliant to see so many of you here today. We were anxious about the prospect of what a tube strike was going to do to an in-person event, but we're packed to the rafters, which is brilliant. We're also welcoming a lot of people online, I think have dialed in to listen, so thank you very much for joining us. I'm really delighted to welcome you all to the launch of the International Behavioural Public Policy Conference for 2025, which is taking place largely in King's College London from tomorrow. I know that many of you are attending the event. I believe it's got 300 delegates, and it's set to be the biggest behavioural public policy conference yet. So thank you very much to all of you for attending, and thank you to Sanchayan and the School for Government at King's for bringing us all together. We're really looking forward to the event. A bit cheeky, when we were asked at the Behavioural Insights team to host the launch event, we thought we'd also use it as an opportunity to share some of our thinking, really launch our thinking on AI and behavioural science. So, I mean, it's not going to come as news to anyone in the room or online that for the last few years we've been increasingly obsessed with the application of AI and, how we can use it really to improve the way we work and make ourselves sort of more effective and more impactful. But really beyond that, we've also been doing a lot of thinking about, what behavioural science can bring to AI and also what AI means for behavioural science as a field. And so those are the things that we're really going to be talking about today. We're thinking about how we believe a nuanced understanding of human decision-making can really augment AI's capabilities, and also how behavioural science can play a very important role in exploring whether individuals are going to adopt AI and do that in the most beneficial way, how we can best align the design of AI with human psychology, and also how society will have to adapt to the impacts of AI. So to discuss this in greater detail, I'd like to welcome BIT's Chief of Innovation and Partnerships, Elizabeth Costa. Now, Liz has been at BIT for 10.5 years. She's led many of our flagship projects on social innovation, on economic policy, consumer behaviours, productivity. She's a senior visiting fellow at the London School of Economics, and she's a member of Ofcom's Advisory Committee on Online Information. Liz is going to be joined by Dario Krupa. He's an associate professor at behavioural science at the LSE. He teaches a pioneering course on behavioural science in an age of AI and new technology. I say pioneering, I think this course started in 2016, which was certainly a long time before most of us were thinking about these challenges and opportunities. He's also a Reid Hoffman AI in Education Fellow and an affiliate of the LSE's Data Science Institute. And we're delighted to have him here today. So thank you both.
Wonderful. Well, firstly, thank you very much, Rachel, for the introduction. And thank you all for coming today. We've had more than 1,000 people register to be here in person and online. And that's really just thrilling for us. We've been very excited about the intersection of AI and behavioural science for a long time. But it's just great to see that shared enthusiasm in the room. And certainly for me, presenting and launching this framework, it's great to hear how many of you are interested and engaged in these issues as well. Before I even get started, I want to acknowledge the co-authors of this framework and paper. So firstly, Dr. Michael Halsworth, who is joining us online today. Michael's in New York, and he's going to be fielding a lot of the questions that come through the online chat with the people who are joining us online. And also Dylan Maru, who is here in the room today. So Michael and Dylan and I have worked on this together for the past few months, and it's very much a joint piece of thinking and work. So before I get started though, here we go. For those of you who are new to BIT, and this is maybe one of the first events that you've come to, I wanted to quickly introduce who we are. So BIT is a global research and innovation consultancy. We are very proudly international, and we work all around the world to apply a behavioural lens to public policy problems and social challenges. And we've really long been interested in the intersection of behavioural science and data science and machine learning. So as far back as 2016, we did a set of exemplar projects for UK government looking at machine learning methods. So we did things like building prediction models to better target regulatory inspections. But as Rachel said, over the past couple of years in particular, we've become increasingly interested in generative AI. And we've been integrating, sorry, there's still quite an echo, if it's possible to, as much as it's nice to hear what I'm saying with a half a second delay, it's a little distracting. I don't know if it's coming out of the iPad maybe. Anyway, I'll crack on. So we've been integrating generative AI into our research. That's much better, thank you. Thank you very much. We've been integrating generative AI into our research methods and our interventions at BIT, but we've also been thinking really deeply about the intersection of behavioural science and AI, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I also want to say at the outset that we're talking about this with a high degree of humility. So we've thought really deeply about these issues, but ultimately we are still at a very early and emergent stage of understanding the intersection of human and artificial intelligence. There's a lot that we collectively don't know as an academia, as a society, and it's also a really vibrant field which is changing very quickly. And Daria and I were saying yesterday, there's some anxiety about publishing anything in this field in that, the world moves on extremely quickly. But what I'm going to present today is our thinking based on the current state of the world and also some of our intuitions about how it might evolve and also how we can shape that evolution. And ultimately, our sense is that the success of AI isn't going to be measured just by technological advancement alone, but really by how well it integrates with human behaviour. So how it's used, whether it bolsters and scaffolds our decision-making, the extent to which it's trusted by us, and the norms that develop off the back of it. And so far, we think that a lot of these behavioural elements have been underexplored, but they're also really powerful. So we think that the insights from behavioural science can help us understand and navigate the risks of the AI age, but also really harness the opportunities, ensuring that the future's not just smarter, but also more human. So tonight, we're going to introduce a new framework for how behavioural science can address 4 big AI challenges. We've thought about BI and AI in terms of both model development and model deployment. And as you can see in the framework here, it is a simplified version. So obviously, it's not a linear process like this in reality. There's a lot of feedback loops and interactions between these pillars. But what we're really trying to capture here is an arc that moves from the foundational issues about the models themselves right through to the macro questions about the impact of AI on society. So starting with the foundational questions of the models themselves, we have augment, which is looking at how we use insights from human cognition to improve the way that AI itself is built. Then moving to model deployment, we start with adoption. So whether and how people use AI, we think is a deeply behavioural question. And in this section, we're looking particularly at how we move people from no adoption along a continuum to what we've called deep adoption. Then we have align, where we're looking at how we design AI systems that behave in ways that are consistent with our intentions, with our values, and ultimately with our well-being. And then finally, adapt. So AI is not just a technological shift, it's a societal one. And here we're looking at how we can really be more deliberate and intentional in how society adapts to the human AI future, and also examining some really deep issues about who it is that decides what that future should look like. Now, we're going to be releasing this framework in 4 parts over the next few weeks, and the keen-eyed among you would have seen that we released Adopt this morning, and those of you who are in the room have the executive summary to give you an overview of the framework as a whole. But today I want to give you an overview of the framework, There's an enormous amount of thinking that's gone into this, so I'm going to do this at a relatively high level, and then I hope that when we get to the questions and discussions, we can delve into some of these issues in greater detail. So let's kick off with augment. And this section is really about how we can improve the way AI models themselves are built. And our core thesis here is that insights from human cognition have long inspired AI research and model development, but we think we can go even further, and that there's ways in which BI can improve the ways in which the models themselves are built. Now, many of you will be familiar with dual process theory. I hope those of you who've self-selected into this room will know a lot about dual process theory. It was obviously popularized by Nobel Prize winner Danny Kahneman and his work with Amos Tversky. And at a very simple level, dual process theory divides the brain into two systems for how we process information and make decisions. So firstly, we have system one, which is fast and intuitive and doesn't require much cognitive effort from us. And secondly, we have system two, which is more deliberative, but also requires a lot more effort from us. And generative AI appears to use this same dual process that we do. But a lot of the current AI models are, whilst they're powerful, they're primarily fast thinkers that are relying on models quite like System 1. And this makes them masters of pattern recognition, but it also leaves them vulnerable to the same kinds of biases that affect human intuition. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. Now, many of you might be familiar with this riddle. So the riddle is that a father is in a car crash with his son, the father dies and the son is rushed to hospital. The surgeon sees the boy and exclaims, "I can't operate on him, he's my son, how is this possible?" And I think many of you who would have seen this in the past know that the answer is that the surgeon is the boy's mother. And what we're showing here is that LLMs can often stitch together a plausible sounding answer. So when you ask it that question in full, it gives the correct answer, that is, the surgeon is the boy's mother. But what you can see in the second question is that when you ask the LLM a similar question that uses the same sentence structure and style, the LLM uses pattern recognition and gives you the same answer. But what you can see in the second question is that there's actually nothing in there that indicates anything about the parents of the son. And so the answer is drawing on System 1 pattern recognition, but it's ultimately an error. And so you might think, why don't we engage System 2 here? Similar to the thinking and reasoning models that have been built into a lot of the large language models that each of us use today. But there's a couple of problems with this. Firstly, recent research shows us that System 1 and System 2 they don't really operate as a binary structure. They operate much more on a spectrum. And really what makes human intelligence so flexible is our ability to navigate that spectrum between System 1 and System 2 and to match our cognitive strategy to the task at hand. So engaging System 2 where we think we need to have something more deliberative and effortful. And there's a body of study and investigation around this which is called metacognition. And at its heart, metacognition is thinking about thinking. And really we think that a key to advancing AI lies in developing this kind of metacognition within AI models. And one of the core recommendations of the paper in this section is the development of what we've called a metacognitive controller for AI, which would be a system that can manage a portfolio of different reasoning approaches and deploy the right one at the right time. Now, GPT-5 is quite a basic version of this. It's able to move between fast responses and thinking modes. But as it stands, GPT-5 is not what we would call resource rational. So what that means is it chooses slow thinking and System 2 much more often than it should. And you might think that that's not a bad thing, that actually we should throw as much cognitive power at problems as possible and try and have models that are effectively always at the extreme end of System 2. But just like we can't move through the world solely in System 2. It's too effortful. AI can't and it shouldn't spend all of its time in System 2 either. It's just not an efficient way to think or to use computational power. So a metacognitive controller would be guided by this principle of resource rationality. It would recognise that thinking costs time and effort and computational power, and that really true intelligence lies in making an optimal trade-off between the accuracy of a decision and the resources spent trying to reach that decision. So we think that this is a really novel and innovative proposal for particularly AI developers, and one that would make AI wiser, more capable, and ultimately more aligned with our long-term goals. Next, we're going to move on to adopt. And as I said, I'm going to canter through these relatively quickly. Here we're looking at why people choose to use or resist AI and how we can better understand and shape those decisions. And really our thinking here is that if AI tools are going to deliver on their potential, whether that's increasing productivity or reducing administrative burden, they need to be used widely and they need to be used meaningfully. But just as we've seen with the adoption of other technologies, from everything from electric vehicles to accounting software, adoption isn't really just a question about the quality and the usefulness of technology. It's also really a behavioural issue, and it's one that's shaped by habits, heuristics, emotions, and social context. And so what you can see on the chart here is that despite the enormous tech advances in AI models over the past year or even the past couple of months, and the fact that prices are coming down, you can see that actually there's signs of adoption slowing, particularly in large firms. And our hypothesis would be that this is at least partly because of a range of behavioural barriers that inhibit adoption. But the good news is that crucially, those barriers also map onto behavioural enablers that organisations can leverage to accelerate adoption, but also encourage thoughtful and deep adoption. And what do we actually mean by that? So firstly, you can see on the chart here that there's quite a big gap between thinking about and investigating AI and actually implementing AI. And then there's an even bigger gap between implementation of general purpose LLMs and those that are more specific and embedded across organisations, which we take as a proxy for deep adoption. So what you're really seeing in the chart here is that firstly, there's many stages of AI adoption. And also a lot of the discourse around AI treats adoption as a yes-no question. So have people or organisations adopted AI or have they not? But we think that framing is really too simplistic. It's not a binary question, and really AI adoption runs along a continuum from no adoption to shallow adoption through to deep adoption. And what we mean by deep adoption, for example, is where adoption is applied to complex or high-value tasks. So you might think about shallow adoption as things like using it to take notes in meetings, whereas deep adoption would be using it to support actually who's heard in those meetings and the types of decisions that that group is able to come to. And we can talk more about this in the questions as well. In the paper, we put forward a new framework for driving AI adoption by understanding the barriers, particularly the behavioural barriers to adoption. There's three main themes that we think drive movements along this adoption continuum. The first is motivation, so whether people see a clear, desirable reason to use AI. The second is capability, so whether people feel that they're able to use it effectively and confidently. And the third is trust, so whether people believe that AI is trustworthy and aligns with their values. And as you can see, we've drawn a lot of inspiration here from the Combe model, but usually while environmental factors like choice architecture and friction would often be categorised under opportunity, we've addressed them here under capability because we think that they directly impact whether users feel that they are able and confident to integrate AI into their workflows. So each of these have behavioural barriers underpinning them, which again, we're happy to go into more detail about. But importantly, they also map onto behavioural enablers. And these are just a couple of examples of the types of enablers that leaders can use to support AI adoption. So firstly, addressing capability. We can structure the adoption journey in a much more manageable way for employees. So particularly, we can use scaffolding techniques so that we can build competence and confidence through a series of managed step-by-step challenges. So for example, starting with low-risk tasks that offer immediate value and opportunity and visible value. So things like using AI to summarise long documents. And then we can move on to more complex or supervised tasks that have greater guardrails around them. Targeting trust and motivation, we can democratise AI adoption. So using things like pilot programs to trial small-scale AI adoption and really incorporating the feedback from employees and users into those programs. You could even go as far as having employees rewrite their roles with an AI-first lens, which is trying to get at the barriers to people feeling threats to their professional identity through AI. And then moving on to motivation, we can also harness loss aversion. So in a really interesting study, people were asked to complete a task with either human or AI assistance. And initially that task was framed around gains. So participants were rewarded for each correct answer that they got. And when that was framed around gains, they showed a really strong bias for human help, even when the AI was more accurate. And what we saw in that study is that actually the preference changed when the task was framed around losses. So if participants were given an endowed amount at the start of $10 and then they lost 50 cents for every wrong answer, they actually valued the AI assistance just as much as the human assistance, which suggests that when we're thinking about organisational applications, framing AI as a tool that could prevent errors or mitigate risks, rather than just as a tool for achieving gains, may make employees more willing to adopt them. So what is it that organisational leaders can do? So in the paper, we set out an organisational roadmap to deeper AI adoption. And there's a couple of different stages here. So firstly, having organisational leaders really think deeply about what are the areas where there are strategic priorities or really high value gains from using AI. Then assessing both the current adoption and diagnosing the particular barriers to adoption. Then co-designing interventions with employees and teams and piloting those interventions. And then particularly taking a test and learn approach to iterate those and scale them across the organisation, and ultimately to also monitor the success of those initiatives as well. Now, moving on to Align. This section is about how we can design AI that really fits human psychology, behaviour, and values. And just to kick us off here, what we're seeing at the moment is really a giant real-world experiment in the ways in which people are using LLMs. So what you're seeing here is data from analysis of more than 1 million ChatGPT interactions. And I doubt that this is how well, maybe it was how, but I'm not sure whether this is how the developers of ChatGPT thought that it was going to be used. But in fact, actually, the second most popular use of LLMs is sexual role-playing. So what we're seeing is that people are experimenting with LLMs. That's creating sudden and unexpected results. And it also leads us with some really difficult questions about how we align those interactions with our preferences and our values and ultimately our well-being. What we can see is, what that shows us is that really this is the first time that people have been able to interact with AI through natural language rather than code. And so what that means is that we're interacting with AI in a relatively anthropomorphic way. So we're confiding in it, we're asking it questions, we're talking with it, And in turn, AI is increasingly influencing human judgments, our choices, and ultimately our norms, which we'll talk a bit more about in Adapt. And a big challenge that presents is alignment. So are those AI systems behaving in a way that is consistent with our preferences, our intentions, our values, and our well-being? And we think that behavioural science gives us tools not just to understand that question, but also it offers concrete ways to increase that alignment between AI and human psychology. And just to dig a bit, oh sorry, I was already on that slide. Just to dig a bit deeper into what we mean here. So what we're seeing across lots of different use cases from that first slide is that LLMs are very powerful influencers of human behaviour. So I'm sure many of you have seen the results of this first study, which was analysing a number of YouTube transcripts and looking at the frequency of the words used. And as you can see, there's a massive uptick in the word delve, which reflects LLM's propensity to use that word. This is particularly troubling to me because I've always enjoyed the word delve, but I now feel like it's sort of off limits for me. You can also see in the experiment on the right that LLMs are also highly persuasive. So this is an experiment where participants were taking an online quiz and they had sets of persuaders, either human persuaders or LLM persuaders. And those persuaders attempted to encourage the quiz takers towards either correct answers or incorrect answers. And what you can see here is that actually the LLM persuaders were more persuasive than even financially incentivized human persuaders. And that was the case both when they were trying to convince people that those quiz takers that answers were correct, so truthful persuasion, and it was also true when they were trying to convince them that the answers were, it was also true when they were being deceptive and trying to convince them towards incorrect answers. So we're already seeing this play out, in real time and across a lot of surprising and different contexts. And another really important point to note is that it's not only that LLMs are influencing our behaviour, the influence is actually bidirectional. So we are influencing, at this point, each other. And there's a lot that's been written and discussed about the fact that LLMs display many human-like cognitive biases, whether that's availability bias or confirmation bias, and particularly overconfidence. And what we're seeing is these feedback loops emerging where those biases seem to have entered the AI models because they are trained from human data in the first place. But then they are also getting reinforced and strengthened through a feedback loop between AI and users like us. When we come in and we display those biases, and then AI has, as you would have all experienced, quite a sycophantic tendency to agree with our statements. And what we're seeing is that's creating what are called chat chambers that reinforce those biases that we're bringing into conversations. And then to complete that feedback loop, that output is becoming part of new training data, which is then, again, reinforcing those biases. In this section, we explore 3 ways that behavioural science can improve alignment. So in particular, I'll go through one of these in detail, but I'll just touch on the other 2. So the first one is fine-tuning models. So this is particularly targeted towards AI developers, but we think that there's more that can be done to instill human values and psychological preferences into the models themselves. Secondly, AI developers and others can brief the model so that it can tailor its responses to particular contexts in a live interaction. So for example, if we as a user come into an LLM chat and it's clear from the patterns of our language or even from the visuals, if it's a visual interface, that we are stressed or we're angry or upset, it could be that actually the LLM can tailor to that context and have some situational awareness about what context that discussion is happening in. And then thirdly, users can trigger aligned features of the models through their own interactions, particularly through user-side prompting. So particularly, the most obvious and perhaps the most established tactic is to prompt an LLM to think carefully and to avoid rapid associative responses that can lead to errors. So some of the more popular ways to do this are firstly chain of thought prompting, so encouraging an LLM to go through something step by step and carefully. That may not be enough to mitigate bias on its own. And so with that in mind, some studies have also shown that asking an LLM to adopt a human persona or a particular professional expertise, for example, can supercharge the effectiveness of those prompts. So for example, saying, imagine you are a tax specialist in the UK who is advising somebody in this situation. And then the final option is to use a more structured thinking prompt to reduce bias, as you can see here. So saying things like, follow this 3-step process. So ultimately, we think that building alignment at multiple levels through fine-tuning, through inference time adaptation or context shaping, as we talked about, and user-side prompting is a way to increase alignment between AI and human psychology. And we think there's a lot to be done here to investigate how this would be implemented and the impact it would have and the influence it would have on human choices and judgments, but also on that feedback loop as well. Now, finally, we move to adapt, where we're looking at how society must evolve to meet the systemic challenges that AI creates. And as I said at the outset, really AI, it's not just a technological shift, it is genuinely a societal shift, and perhaps the biggest technological shift and disruption that we have seen in our lifetimes. And ultimately, as we embed AI into our daily lives, we think that these early patterns of adoption will evolve and harden into new social norms, particularly new social norms about how we interact between humans and machines, or humans and AI, but also actually how we interact with each other and the nature and character of our human-to-human relationships, which is a very technical way of putting it, but basically how we all get along. And we also think there's a pretty limited window of opportunity to be deliberate in how we shape the evolution of those norms so that AI ultimately augments and enhances human judgment and capabilities and also relationships. And then this section also looks at very fundamental questions about who decides what that should look like and how do we encourage participation and a collective voice from a wide range of AI users. Now, in each of these sections, the paper goes into a lot of different use cases and scenarios about how these norms are evolving. But I just want to highlight one from each tonight. So firstly, on the human-AI interactions, I want to talk about cognitive degrading and cognitive offloading. And the first thing to say actually is this is not a new issue. So when the ancient Greeks were starting to write on tablets, Plato was very concerned that writing would implant forgetfulness because he thought that men would cease to exercise memory because they rely on that which is written. And, and actually, I'll finish the whole quote because it's a good quote. They would rely on that which is written, calling to things to remembrance no longer from within themselves, but from means of external marks. Now, we know that the impacts of the written word were not as extreme as Plato feared on our memory and our cognition, but there does seem to be some early evidence that AI is being used to offload cognitive tasks. Now, that might be appropriate for certain tasks, and we can talk more about that. But it becomes really quite a challenge when what we're offloading is higher order critical thinking and judgment. And what you can see here is the results of a survey that Microsoft conducted with over 300 knowledge workers. And what they found in the self-reports was that many of those workers felt that a heavy reliance on AI tools led to a reduction in critical thinking. A lot of those users trusted AI outputs, and they actually shifted from a mindset of problem solving and critical thinking towards a mindset of merely verifying AI outputs. And this is genuinely an emerging area, and a lot of the evidence is pretty early stage, and some of it has some real challenges with it. But the risk is that over time, this leads to a degradation of our cognitive skills. So some early studies are showing that people are beginning to settle for good enough solutions, they're satisficing, and that this is leading to a gradual cognitive atrophy. And I know many of you in the room have anecdotes about this, particularly those of you who are in academia and teaching young students who are relying on AI for lots of things. But perhaps a more optimistic take of this comes from two philosophers, Andy Clark and David Chalmers, and they have a theory of the extended mind. And their argument is that actually our cognition has always been hybrid. So we've always stretched into the tools and the environments that we use. So for example, calculators didn't eliminate our ability to do mental arithmetic, nor did GPS completely wipe out our spatial reasoning skills. But it did change them and extend them and reshape the ways in which those skills were applied. And their argument is that AI can act as a similar extension and reshaping. And the reason I've got a picture of a Go board here, those of you who know the game Go, this study looked at human creativity and people's ability to play Go after they'd been exposed to playing with an AI. And what they found was that actually the AI, when they played it, made moves that they had never thought of, that they didn't think any human would have ever thought of. And actually it pushed and extended those players to rethink the way that they were playing the game and to be more creative in the types of moves that they were making. But ultimately, what I want to leave you with this whole section of ADAPT actually is that these are, we're in a stage where a lot of these norms are still shaping and shifting, and we have a lot of choices in front of us about which of these, what the future actually looks like. Are we using AI to offload higher order critical thinking, or are we using it as an extended mind to really push ourselves and do things that we didn't think were possible before? I want to move on next to human-human relationships. And these are two quotes from, firstly, a recent essay by Mustafa Suleyman, who's the CEO of Microsoft AI, which was called "We Must Build AI for people, not to be a digital person." If you hadn't read it, I'd really encourage you to. It's a great meditation on a lot of the ethical and practical issues about anthropomorphic AI systems. And the second question is the second quote is that the future of AI isn't about replacing humans, it's about augmenting human capabilities, which is really what we're looking at in that human-AI interaction piece. But what we also see is that AI is also shaping human relationships. So the way we communicate, from the words we use through to what we expect of each other personally and professionally. And AI companions in particular represent, I think, quite an extreme recalibration of expectations in particularly intimate relationships. And I think they have potential spillovers for human relationships as well. So on the one hand, AI can provide a useful augmentation of human-to-human relationships. So they can be an alternative outlet for sensitive conversations, or even mundane conversations, actually. I saw a great quote saying that one of the advantages of AI is it never gets bored of you, and you can ask it the same question over and over again, or have the same line of inquiry, and whilst your friends or your partner might say, "God, let's not talk about that again," the AI is not going to do that. But there's a couple of risks. The first is substitution of human relationships. So AI companions are designed to be frictionless, they're always available, they're never offended, they're instantly responsive. And as you can see here, this is a picture from the Replica website, and it's very much positioning itself as a better substitute for a human relationship. And, you know, if you were an impressionable teenager, or in fact even an impressionable middle-aged person, you know, I think after interacting on this basis, human interactions might feel awkward or uneven or require a lot of reciprocity and compromise that you've become unaccustomed to. And it might just feel too costly to do that. Again, these are very emerging issues, and these are speculative rather than evidence-based. But I think there's also a risk of distortion that, you know, as I said, we may begin expecting that same kind of unconditional giving from human relationships and become ill-equipped to deal with complexity. And again, as I said, I want to leave you with the sense that none of these outcomes are inevitable. We can design AI. AI companions are of our design. And we can design them to be coaches and practice grounds for healthy relationships, to teach us to ask better questions, to resolve conflicts, to be more empathetic and reciprocal. Or our design choices can lead them to be substitutes and isolation chambers that make us ill-equipped for human relationships. So here we're getting into really quite fundamental questions about how we go on as a society and how we live side by side with artificial intelligence. And the last thing I want to leave you with is some reflections on how we navigate this future. There's a really excellent paper by Iyad Rawan called Society in the Loop, and he draws on the theory of human in the loop approaches to say that actually we should embed the judgment of society as a whole in the governance of AI. And what he's really trying to recognise is that many of these decisions and choices have implications not just for us as individuals or us as employees and members of organisations, but for society as a whole. And therefore, they should require broader democratic input into what we all want that future to look like and how we want it to evolve. And deliberative and participatory methods give us a really practical route to do that. So BIT has been involved in this for a long time. Since 2021, we worked with Meta to run some of the largest scale deliberative consultations on AI governance. So this particular one here we ran in 2023 with about 1,500 participants from across 5 countries, so Brazil, Germany, Spain, and the United States. And we were discussing and deliberating what principles should guide AI's engagement with users. And what we saw in this was that actually there was a lot of different preferences and context across different countries in terms of the desire for transparency, for labelling, and also for what was deemed to be socially acceptable in those interactions as well. But it ultimately gave those users a collective voice to have a say in actually how Meta went ahead with developing those guidelines. And I think credit to Meta, they've continued this work, and they've just recently started launching community forums that are drawing in other industry players who are central to AI development. And this one up here was run in 2024 by the Stanford Deliberative Democracy Lab, and they were looking at the future of agentic AI in particular. And I want to leave you with a quote from the organisers of this. And they said, "What if the public were not just passive recipients of these technologies, but active participants in guiding their evolution?" And I think there's a lot that we can do to try and make that a reality. And indeed, it feels to me incredibly important that we do. So to conclude, we've gone through, at pace, the 4 pillars of our new framework. So augment, adopt, align, and adapt. And really what we've tried to argue here is that AI is already shaping how we live, how we make decisions, how we interact with one another. But we think with a deep understanding of human behaviour, we can reduce the risks of low adoption or shallow adoption, misalignment, societal lock-in, and brittle intelligence. And we think that behavioural science is an underexplored but powerful lever for understanding and ultimately shaping the interaction between AI and human behaviour and human intelligence. And this is an area that we feel incredibly passionate about. I hope the level of interest in the room indicates that many of you do as well. It's an area we'd love to do more work in. So if any of these ideas have sparked thoughts or ideas about what we could do together, please come and talk to us afterwards in the reception or get in touch online. We would love to turn some of these ideas into reality, and we would love to do more experiments and investigation of what this looks like in practice. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So now, after a talk, I will give you a very easy question for the start. So imagine we are 10 years in the future. It's 2035.
Yes.
And behavioral science has effectively integrated AI. What does this behavioral science look like?
Yep, great.
Very easy question.
So, is it an easy question? No, it's a good question. Well, there's a couple of things. So it's a slightly different question to the one we're exploring in the framework, although it has overlaps with it. So as I mentioned at the very start, at BIT we've been doing a lot of work to integrate generative AI into our research methods and our interventions. So I think that in 10 years' time, that will have accelerated and evolved. Mm-hmm. So at the moment we're doing things, and certainly you, Dario, are doing things as well, like exploring how we use AI to do qual work at scale, mm-hmm. either with AI interviewers or synthetic participants. We're doing things like building interventions that incorporate AI chatbots so that those interventions are not static, but rather they're dynamic, they can be personalised. We, for example, have done a lot of work on vaccination chatbots, which Monica in the front row has led. And we see there that a chatbot that can have a dynamic, interactive, personalised conversation can more than triple vaccination rates. So there's a lot of reason to think that actually using AI across the behavioural toolkit, from mm-hmm. research methods to interventions, to evaluation and analysis, allows us to have more impact, have impact at greater scale, mm-hmm. and also to be, I guess, more thoughtful and sophisticated in the work we do. So I think it should be really exciting and engaging for the people in this room. And then I think coming back to the framework, we've also seen that there is this emerging field about how AI itself influences human behaviour. And I feel like we're really at the beginning of understanding those dynamics. And I hope that in 10 years' time, we have not only a much better understanding of it, but we've been able to thoughtfully shape what that looks mm-hmm. like.
If AI doesn't become smarter than us and overtake us, but well, hopefully not. So now, after a very easy question, some more difficult questions.
Yeah.
So I read the report on your framework that you sent me, and one of the things that the report stresses is the importance of leaders modeling the use of AI. Mm-hmm. So how could leaders do this without overwhelming their teams, which may mm-hmm. be scared of AI or quite uncertain about their future or jobs or anything related to AI?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of what we talk about in the paper is the importance of role modelling and messenger effects. So having that that signal from leadership of organisations that they are using AI, that there are useful and thoughtful ways to do that across the organisation. I also think a really important thing that leaders can do is give licence to their teams to experiment and to be playful with AI. Actually, at BIT, we have a Slack channel called AI BI, where all day, every day, people are posting the types of things they're using AI for, and talking to each other about what's working, what's not working, some of the interesting and cool things they've done. And I think there's a lot of leadership support for that kind of grassroots, bottom-up experimentation, and then taking the things that are working really well and building those into organizational processes.
Nice. So I think I will ask you one more question, and then I think we can open questions to the audience.
Yeah.
So one of the main obstacles to AI adoption is that its benefits can often be very abstract. So we can say, okay, AI boosts productivity, but for different people, this can mean different things. Economists have very varying predictions about this. So how can actually we make these benefits more concrete to people so that they're actually motivated to use and adopt AI?
Yeah, I think that's right, that often the benefits don't feel salient, particularly if they're quite distributed. There's a really interesting study from Microsoft, again, where they demonstrated that a sort of behavioural tipping point was if users got 11 minutes of efficiency gains a day and saw that consistently over 11 weeks, that was something that shifted people's mindsets. Now,
11 minutes.
we can talk about the exactly how robust that is, but I think it's a nice rule of 11. So I think thinking about how you translate that productivity into task-level outcomes. So again, we did a piece of work with the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology on AI-assisted literature reviews, which gave us very concrete ideas about exactly what those gains were in terms of time efficiency at each stage of the literature review, and also quality. So I think making it concrete for staff in those ways. And again, encouraging employees to share, what are the things that are working for them, and really celebrating those as well.
It's actually interesting that people in some cases feel that AI increases productivity even when it reduces it. There was like a study on programmers, and in some cases AI actually increased the amount of time they spent programming, but I thought it decreased the amount of time. So perceptively, it seems it's maybe because it's engagement and it feels more social.
Yeah.
Okay, let's now open questions to the audience. So, okay, like this person. Yeah, I think you are first, so we will reward the speed this time.
Thank you so much, very insightful. You talk about Plato, you talk about Chalmers, you talked about Clarke. I would like to talk about Kant.
Sure.
And Immanuel Kant talks about the idea of enlightenment and how the use of our reason is able to make us autonomous. And he was warning us against guardians. And he would say there is no need to think if someone else can think for you. Basically say, watch out, don't be lazy, don't be a coward, use your understanding. In what sense the AI is going to be one of those guardians that are going to limit our autonomy?
Oh. I mean, I guess the honest answer is I don't know. I don't think any of us know. It's an open question, isn't it? And again, I guess I would come back to the point I was making in the adapt section, which is that I don't think any of these outcomes are determined for us yet. I think we have real choices as a society about how we want this to evolve, or at least that's my optimistic take on it. I mean, I think there are some interesting dynamics from the philosophical point of view. So we've also run an experiment which we'll be publishing in a few weeks' time. But we were investigating things like trolley problems and moral dilemmas. And what we discovered through that is that most of the models are pretty utilitarian, and certainly some more than others, but I think most of them would be more utilitarian than your average person. And that has implications. implications. If you end up going to models to talk about moral judgments or ethical judgments, if that model is taking a very particular, philosophical stance or worldview, like being extremely utilitarian, that again, coming back to the alignment point, has a real impact on human judgment and influence. So I should say, as I said at the very beginning, we're doing this with a lot of humility, and there's a lot that we've thought deeply about this, but there's a lot we don't know. So I'd also use that as an open invitation for people in the audience. If you want to weigh in on some of these questions, please do. I feel like collectively we have a lot of knowledge and wisdom in the room. We can have a discussion rather than it being just two-way.
Thank you. So let's see someone from this side, maybe you, yeah?
Thank you very much. So my question is, what do you see as the barriers, the main barriers, to achieving truly agentic AI in the corporate environment? And specifically, when might we expect to see seamless cross-platform AI assistance where tools like email, CRM systems, MarTech systems, and data lakes are fully integrated to provide meaningful and proactive support in our day-to-day work?
So in terms of particularly the behavioural barriers, I think a big one is trust and trustworthiness, because, and we talk a bit about agentic AI in the paper, but less so because that is very much an emerging field. But I think when you're thinking about a fully integrated agentic workflow of writing, reading emails, like you want to be really confident that actually those are going to be written in a way that, you know, if it's me, that I feel is a reflection not just of my judgment, but also of my personality, of my relationships, of the nuances and complexities of those. So I think that's both, it's a combination of trust and trustworthiness, but also the capabilities of the models themselves as well, and some of those alignment questions. And yeah, actually, I might leave it there, given we've got a lot of questions in the room, but happy to pick up more.
Thank you. So maybe let's have one more person from the room, and then we will go online. They're actually very difficult questions online, so I'm
Michael can answer those.
a bit scared of asking them. Let's maybe, yeah, you.
Thank you. I think one of the factors that I hear is the environmental considerations. That's a big barrier that people have. And I wondered, what do you think are the trade-offs of the societal benefits of AI and the environmental considerations?
Yeah. So it's not an issue I've thought deeply about, and as I understand it, there is some contention about the exact environmental implications in terms of both water use and energy use. But it is clear that, you know, it's an enormous draw on both of those things. I think when it comes to this paper, one of the reasons that we have recommended the metacognitive controller, and that you wouldn't want models that are purely in system 2 and using maximum computational power for every inquiry, is that does have implications for the environmental spillovers as well, because ultimately we want it to be an efficient system that's adapting to what we need it to do. But again, we can pick that up. Thank you.
So now we have some questions from the online audience. So this one is tricky, but less tricky than some other ones.
You can
it
help
says, you mentioned a small window of opportunity to shape how AI evolves. This is often raised. Are we being too alarmist?
Are we being too alarmist? I'm not sure I mean it in an alarmist sense. It's more, and I should say, when we tried to put a bound on that window in the paper, that we found that very challenging in terms of actually, do we think it's 6 months? Do we think it's 18 months? Do we think it's 3 years? We can make an educated guess at that, but the truth is we don't really know. I think we meant it less in an alarmist sense and more in the sense of this is an opportunity. We know that norms solidify and become sticky and difficult to change. We can see those norms evolving now, you know, as we go on. And so rather than an alarmist tendency, it's that actually this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to be deliberate and intentional about what we want that to look like. I think there are people who are more alarmist about it.
Yeah, no, that is true. See, I think, I mean, we have some more questions online, but they seem to require relatively long answers.
Okay.
So maybe, actually, we could maybe have one brief, short questions from the audience before we end. Who has a very short, easy question? Maybe you. Yeah?
All the hands went down. Hi, Annalise.
You said AI could help influence human-to-human relationship and shape social norms. One of the social norm that changed the fastest recently is that people started to think it's okay to listen to their videos without headphones in public places. Have you noticed? Right. So here's a little case study for you. How could AI help?
Oh. You mean, how could it help people
Bring civilization back.
Oh. I thought these were meant to be easy questions. So I think actually some countries are starting to regulate that noise pollution of people watching YouTube on buses without headphones. I'm not sure of the link between AI and that, but I mean, how can it help? So we cite a couple of studies in the paper about how AI can effectively mediate human relationships. So there's some great studies, for example, on using AI intermediaries to, I guess, mediate political debates, particularly on really contentious issues like gun control, and to give prompts, so it's two humans having an online conversation, but then there's an AI intermediate that says to me, actually, Liz, maybe rather than saying people who believe in gun control are, don't understand the Constitution, here's actually a much more neutral way to say that, which preserves your intent, but is probably going to be better received by the other person and therefore lead to a more constructive conversation. And what they're seeing from those types of studies is that actually, AI in that intermediation role can be used to build common ground and to build a more constructive conversation. So I think there's lots of applications of it that can actually, should give us hope about reducing polarization and, really facilitating and enhancing human connection. But again, it needs to be used deliberately, and that needs to be scaled and done thoughtfully. And then maybe we'll save civilization. What a note to end on.
You may be much more optimistic about the future of humanity than I am.
I'm going to come up and just say a quick thank you so much to Liz and Dario for a really, really interesting conversation. And congratulations, Liz, for surviving that Q&A. I don't think I've ever seen such a wide-ranging and challenging Q&A after a presentation. So I really enjoyed the event. There's lots of unanswered questions still. I think there are drinks outside, so I'd love it if everyone stayed and carried on the conversation and shared your ideas with us. Thank you.